Welcome to A Lunch with Biggie, a podcast about small business and creatives sharing their stories and inspiring you. My guest today has a passion for coffee. He started out using a popcorn popper to roast coffee on a stove. Now, 6 years in, he's the owner and head roaster of Otus Coffee. Please welcome Glen Turchin. What's going on, Glen?
How you doing?
Thank you so much for inviting me to your nest. I appreciate the coffee break. It's kind of like I almost feel like it's coffee with Biggie. But so I guess my first question I usually ask people, we're going to go two parts. My first one is, how do you take your coffee?
I take my coffee black, straight up. I don't like to add anything to the art of coffee.
Okay.
However, with that being said, I do not judge anybody who wants to add anything to their coffee. So let's be clear on that.
No, I like that. And then, okay, so and then obviously I'm a sandwich guy. What's your go-to like lunch or sandwich?
Ooh, lunch or sandwich? Are we talking like everyday sandwich, or are we talking once every? You
can give me both, because obviously I know what the day to day of a small business owner is. Sometimes it's like whatever's around I grab.
Yeah.
So I mean, if someone said, if I said to you, hey, I'm going to pick up lunch for you, and so it's obviously something special. What sandwich am I bringing you?
Wow, I feel like I'm going to be judged hard on this, but that's okay. For an everyday sandwich, a pub sub for me. That's like. Around the nest too here, there's not many options, so that's usually what we go for. I haven't had it in a while, but I really liked he has like 2 shops now.
Badass.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed theirs. Like we used to get them all the time. We lived in Baldwin, and it's been a while, but I really enjoyed that. This is a hard question. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else.
And obviously I'm not trying to, this is about me talking about you and coffees, but I could talk sandwiches all day. So my two quick little questions are, when you say pub sub, what exactly is your pub sub order?
My pub sub order is definitely not the chicken tender sub. I think that is overrated.
Correct.
And I will say that right now. And I think I really like just a Boar's Head Ultimate is what I go for.
That's me.
Okay,
that's my thing. I love
and peppercorn gourmets.
Okay.
That's my avenue right there.
Gotcha. And then do you remember what you got at Badass?
Ooh, I don't, man. It's been a while, but I loved every sandwich we got from them. Yeah. I think the one that my wife got was the one that you like dip in the tomato sauce, maybe like a grilled cheese knockoff. Yeah. And I think I got like a roast beef sauerkraut, something that I really was into.
Yeah, he does a really good job. I absolutely love what he does. But let's talk coffee. I want to
Hold on, what's your favorite sandwich?
It depends.
See,
it depends.
Tough question.
Obviously I always plug my sandwich. The one that has my name on it, which is the one over at Gnarly Barley, which is Biggie's Bomb Me, which is like an orange chicken.
I've never had that.
It's an orange chicken sandwich that has orange chicken sandwich with basically like a pickled has pickled coleslaw as well as pickled carrots and cucumbers.
Is this the new Gnarly Barley?
Yes.
On the corner of Orange?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it has and then it has like a sweet chili mayo, and it's on a brioche bun. It's originally, the concept was done as I used to make this sandwich at home with like leftover Trader Joe's orange chicken, and I would do like the bread and I would do the pickled veggies and all that stuff. And then when I talked to Gnarly, we basically had a conversation. I had them on the podcast. When they were about to open the new spot, and I was super excited, and it was just one of those things where I was like, hey, are you guys bringing chicken sandwiches back? Because they used to have another spot, and then I made it for them, and that was it. Like, it literally was like, hey, we want to put it on the menu. But I basically tell people, like, I love all sandwiches. It all depends on really what your mood is. If you want it hot, you want it cold, what do you kind of want? So I will tell you that it just kind of varies. A lot of times I'll tell people, just send me a DM, tell me what you're in the mood for.
Sure.
Just, and kind of in your case, like, you make so many different coffees. I'm pretty sure it'd be kind of hard for you to say, well, what's your favorite Otus coffee?
I get that question a lot. Like, what's your favorite coffee? And it's a hard question because
Correct.
What's your mood? Is it an espresso? Is it a latte? Like, what avenue, tough.
Like a lot
of options.
And that's kind of where it kind of falls when it comes to sandwiches. So tell me, I mentioned it already about like how, like, tell me a little bit about how you got into the whole coffee thing. Like what is it about coffee that you love? And then kind of like, I kind of brought it up in the intro about like how you started with like a popcorn popper to roast coffee. I kind of just want to get a little bit of an idea of like how the evolution of Otus Coffee came and how it all kind of started.
Sure. It's pretty simple. I mean, I started drinking Maxwell House in my first job out of college, and grabbed the pot, pour it in your cup, put whatever you had to put into it and drink it. That evolved into probably a macchiato from Starbucks, if I dare say. And that turned into eventually me cold brewing coffee with my French press. We lived in Atlanta for a short time, and that was like I loved it. I loved to cold brew all the different blends they had, all the very dark roast that they had, and then became like a professional or a connoisseur of making cold brew. And then one of my buddies came to Atlanta, and he threw me a bag of a natural processed Ethiopia coffee. And I can still remember the morning where I ground this coffee, put it in the French press. The next morning I woke up, I took a sip of it, and it's almost like those movies where the camera like pans through their ear hole into their brain and you see neurons just firing. That happened because I just tasted like milk chocolate, fresh blueberry, and like strawberry. And from that second, I was like, I want to learn how to do this. And so from there, it became, I wanted to open a coffee shop, and I was kind of bouncing around ideas. And then we moved back to Orlando, and my buddy's like, hey, you should start roasting on a popcorn popper. And also, I appreciate you having the history there.
Yeah, man, I do. I like my research. And
I can tell you do. I definitely can.
And a lot of it is just because of the fact that I love hearing people's stories. And so that's kind of one of the big things was like when I heard that, and then obviously we'll evolve as you keep telling your story about where it goes. The fact of where you kind of went, how it started with the popcorn popper, and then kind of where it transitioned like a short period of time after. I just think it's amazing how you kind of went, and that's one of the things I love is the fact that you are, and I will tell you, I mentioned it even before we even started the podcast. It's intimidating to me because kind of like the way you kind of looked at me, like, are you judging me when you said sandwiches? Like that's how I feel when it comes to coffee, because you're right. We're so used to drinking the Folgers or the Maxwell Houses,
right?
That sometimes you don't know what it's supposed to really taste like, and that's always kind of the big thing, like when it comes to it, because and we'll kind of talk a little bit about kind of how that works, because you kind of have like a love of coffee, and obviously there's different flavors and different smells and different aromas, but at the same time there's also like the everyday Joe that will drink their regular coffee that just wants something better, but they don't really want all the other stuff that goes with it.
They want convenience.
Correct. Yep. So popcorn popper. And I remember roasting like 2 batches. One I burnt completely because I'm standing there cranking this thing on my stove, and I had to kind of figure out how to roast on it. And then the second one I roasted, and like the house was it was a 500 square foot apartment, or however many feet it was, in Baldwin. And I remember my wife like coming out of the bedroom like, what are you doing? Because like the fire alarm wasn't going off, but I'm pretty sure it was closed, so we had to open all the doors, smoked out the apartment. But I just loved the process. I loved watching it turn from green to yellow, and then yellow to like brown, and the aromas, and I just fell in love with it that moment. And then 3 months later after that, I had the 1K, the commercial coffee roaster sitting in my garage on the floor on a pallet, which was like, I think I saw something like, wasn't it like $3,000 or $6,000? It was like pretty expensive.
Yeah, it was like,
how quickly between that, like by the time you did like at what point did you go and convince her to say, hey, I want to buy a commercial popper?
Yeah, that first roast was like, I think it was like August. And then I had the roaster sitting in my garage floor in December. And yeah, it was a quick process. And everyone I talked to was like, why would you spend $5,000 on a coffee roaster? And I was like, I don't know. I love this. So, yeah. And I remember like putting half of it on a credit card, like a new business card, 25% was cash, 25, like it was hilarious the way I financed it, but we got it done.
Hey, and just so you know, like this is not the first time I've heard people that have a fascination for something like this. When I talked to Kelly, that was the big thing for them when they started ice cream. One of the things was they both gave each other originally ice cream makers for holidays. And then they both realized, like they didn't realize it, and they both gave it to each other as gifts. And they both realized they loved ice cream. And so they ended up actually buying commercial grade ice cream maker and had it in the middle of their like dining room with like the cables, like all the different extension cords and all stuff for power. So like, I totally understand it. Like, I think that's amazing. I think it's amazing that your wife kind of had like, because I know, when you start talking certain things like that, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure the conversation kind of went with like, well, why do you want to do this?
Where are you going with this?
Where are you going with this? Because this is not like, for what it is. So that can, I guess, and I'm gonna ask the question just because I'm gonna ask the stupid questions just because I'm trying to learn. I want to learn this. I'm kind of curious about this because I'm always, like I said, I'm not a coffee connoisseur, so therefore I don't understand some of these things in the sense of like when people start telling you where these beans are coming from and all these different things and how I'm assuming, and obviously I know the soil plays a factor with like all the different and the areas and the vegetation and all those things kind of create the different beans and all those different things. Like you started talking about cherries and kind of like washing. Can you just give me like a quick little, like, I don't know, like give me like a way you would explain to your son Carson how coffee art is to me, to basically explain to me like where it comes from? And sorry, listeners, but I figure I'm like, maybe you're in the same point as me. Because when I hear people like, oh, this one's from Ethiopia and this one's from Colombia, like I don't understand. It doesn't do anything for me. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
So coffee grows on a coffee tree. Or a bush, whatever. I mean, it's technically called a coffee tree. And it all began way back in, I think it was the 1400s. And these plants were found in Yemen. And over the years, these plants were taken from Yemen and planted elsewhere. Basically what happens is these trees bloom with flowers or blossom. And then slowly a cherry grows on that tree. Inside of that cherry is a coffee seed. It's actually not, I don't know why we call it a bean. It's like the debated thing in the industry. Yeah. It's actually a seed. And
so every single one of these little beans, or like what we call beans, are actually like seeds that would come from a cherry tree? Or
that
like
is correct.
Coffee
and
tree?
There's two of them inside of each cherry, which is why they're flat on one side and round on the other.
Got it.
And the reason they were found was because a farmer had some goats. He let them out, and the goats came back, and they were dancing off the walls, which is why if you ever see a coffee shop called like Dancing Goats, or that's kind of a throwback to the start of coffee.
Got it.
So they obviously found a way how to roast them. And then, early on in probably the 1800s, as we talked about earlier, coffee was just this black mud. There was no focus on quality. There was no focus on like fermentation, and the coffees were obviously consumed with whatever you had to put in them to make them drinkable. As time has gone on, and Starbucks and then the third wave hit of coffee, there's been a really big focus on quality of coffee. And that is everything from the growing of the coffee, the harvesting of the coffee, the processing of the coffee, which is very important. And then, of course, the shipment and roasting and brewing. So in the grand scheme of things, all coffee comes from different origins. And they do have different, characteristics, but those lines have been kind of blurred a little bit because of trees taken from Ethiopia to Costa Rica and trees from, Colombia taken to Guatemala, and then similar processing methods all being shared around the world. So what was once very obvious and set characteristics of a country are kind of blurred a little bit. And you can still get like nice fruited floral notes from Ethiopia and more earthy and full like heavy body from like Indonesia, but a lot of it comes down to the processing of the coffee. And then obviously as a roaster, our job is to just not screw that up.
And then do you have a predominant, like Otus Coffee, is it predominantly from one particular region or one particular area?
We buy coffee from wherever tastes good. Okay. I really don't have, I love Ethiopia. I love Colombia. I love whatever country you want to put in that statement. But we taste all of our coffees blindly when we're picking. And so we'll get a bunch of coffees from a variety of producers and a variety of, suppliers. And we'll taste them. And whatever tastes good for whatever avenue we're looking for, whether it's like, our night owl espresso or a nice juicy natural processed coffee or whatever it might be. And then we just pick blindly. So a lot of our coffees tend to be from Central and South America and Africa, but we've also had coffees from, Indonesia. We have tasted coffees recently from like a Vietnam or other, even from like India. So again, I don't pick coffees based on country. I pick them based on
the flavor
and how what we like. Yep.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so then let's talk about how, we'll bring it back. I want to bring it back to Otus. First off, like, where did the name come from?
So Otus was a term I found a long time ago, and I was always fascinated with 2-syllable words for a company, whether it would be Tesla or Apple. Like, I don't know what it is. I knew I wanted to own a company one day. I guess that was my thought, and I always liked, 2-syllable words, simple, clean, and simple. And I found Otus, which I love owls. Yeah, so I started looking up terms for owls. Like, what term could I use that would have an association to owls? Because I love owls. I love the symbol of an owl for a coffee company, and I just think they're really cool creatures. And so I found in my research 2 terms that were Greek terms for horned owls. One was Tygo, which I liked, and one was Otus. And in the end, I went with Otus.
Yeah, Otus has a good ring. A good ring to it.
That's kind of where the origin of that came from.
No, I like that. I like that. So then, so you bought the commercial roaster. Obviously that's like a total different avenue. You're going from, that's like kind of like telling someone who's a baker. I kind of look at it as the way you were kind of going was almost like a home baker, going from a home baker to, now I'm actually in a commercial kitchen. You're actually using a commercial product now. Like, how did that learning process go? I'm assuming you kind of, you're buying obviously more coffee beans and more beans and all that stuff in order to kind of produce all this stuff. Like, at what point did you kind of say, okay, well, I have this machine, I love doing this, I want to kind of start making it into like a side hustle or into a business, into Otus Coffee?
Sure. I really started just selling to friends and family initially. I would just spend hours out there roasting. I loved it. I can't explain why. I loved getting new coffees and finding ways to roast them, in the best way possible. And I remember one day somebody's like, "Hey, Avalon Diner, right around the corner, you should go pitch them on your coffee." And so I was like, sure, why not? And I can still remember the day we went in there and we tasted all these coffees, and I strategically, and I still do this today, if I know they have not so good coffee, I'll put 2 of my coffees first and then their coffee last. And I'll say to them like, hey, these are all random, taste away. And I remember him sipping the first 2 coffees, and when he took a sip of the last coffee, his eyes lit up and he goes, "Please tell me this is not my coffee." And so that was kind of my strategy going forward. Like, hey, we're small, hustling, love roasting, would love to support you guys with coffee. And so there were some barriers there, obviously, being in my garage, and roasting and selling to other companies was a big challenge. So I started, again, just trying to get the name out for direct to consumer. And then we slowly took on a couple, B2B accounts with obviously the warehouse space and a new roaster in mind.
Yeah. And then did you guys, at one point I saw that you guys were actually, had like a little spot where you guys were actually brewing coffee and stuff like that. Was that ever, I think I saw something like that where you guys had like a little spot somewhere that you guys were actually also preparing coffee. Was that originally an idea, or was your idea always, I just want to roast and sell my coffee?
So a coffee shop has always been in the plans. We haven't taken that jump yet because we really want to just perfect what we're doing here at the roastery level. We did take on a buddy of mine as a partner, and we had a coffee bar at Home State Brewing for a short period of time, which the coffee bar is still there. It's now called Filigree. So we did get a little, we stepped into that for a little while, the retail side of things, which I really loved. I love just like the fostering of community, which you really don't get as much with just a warehouse space, right?
Yeah.
And so we did that. We really enjoyed it. We learned a lot, but we're going to double down for right now on the roasting side, and then hopefully 1 to 2 year plan on a shop.
And I think, that works out great because, like, if you think about it, you already got a sip of what it's like.
Yeah, it's a whole different world. I got to tell you, it's like almost a different industry from the roasting side.
I'm almost thinking it's like it's definone businesses.
Yeah, 100%.
For sure. So I definitely can understand where that kind of comes from. So one of the things that I notice is, like, obviously I feel like, and it's so tough, and I'm just kind of curious on like how you kind of, because there's so many different people now that produce. They're either producing coffee beans and like being able to do it, and then at the same time, like there's like coffee shops and all those different things. So there's like obviously America is like obsessed with coffee, so it's obviously a huge industry. Tell me a little bit about some of the like the difficulties of entry level, and especially now, like because mostly right now from what I'm gathering. Since you're not actually, selling it at like a coffee shop, you're selling it at coffee shops, your coffee, but you're not actually, so people can buy your coffee at either, like a Jeff's or a Create and other places that are actually, they're using your coffee as their coffee. But, how difficult has it been all these years? Cause you basically also, and we'll kind of use this as well as a transition for you to tell the story of like how you went from, obviously going it from your house, had a full-time job, also was doing it as a side thing where you were roasting at night. And then at what point, because now you've been doing this now 6 years, so kind of give people a little bit of an idea of kind of like that aspect of as you're growing, the entry point, the difficulties, but at the same time, how you went from going side hustle, home project, with another job to all of a sudden, hey, Otus now is full-time.
So I think the barriers to entry in roasting were pretty tough. When you go to coffee shops, they would say, well, where else are you selling? And I would say nowhere. And they would say, okay, thank you. So, I really respect a Vesper, a Create Coffee, some of those early partners that we had and valued big time for taking a chance on us. And eventually, I think the way that we won is that we just really cared about the product. As you mentioned, it was kind of a passion project for me, which was a big learning into growing it to an actual business, which we can touch on that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I feel like we just had nothing to hide, right? We were there to do what we loved, share it with people, and that's really how we won and how we gained more accounts. And I think a big part of our success as well is just fostering that community within, meeting new baristas, meeting shop owners, and just building that community within the coffee community. And then I would say, the biggest learning for us over the past, I would say 2 years. So, it was my side hustle for a while. I loved it. I would call it quote unquote purist when it came to coffee. We didn't roast dark. We didn't, flavor our coffees. We didn't do anything like that. As we've grown from roasting in the garage to roasting here in the warehouse, there's been a big awareness shift of this is a passion project, but it also is a business. And you have to understand that all the things that I believed in early on, you had to kind of go back and question those about coffee, right? Like, should we launch Night Owl, for example, was something that we didn't want to launch for the longest time. And when we did, it was the most successful coffee, and today still is the most successful coffee, which was considered like a darker roast for us. And so I think anyone out there that's maybe starting a passion project and really wants to convert it into a full-time gig, you have to understand that a passion and a business are very different. And it took me 6 years, and I'm still learning today of how to make that jump.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with that, because that's the hard part sometimes when it's a passion, it becomes like almost like your baby, and then you don't want to. And then a lot of times, then there's a lot more. You're more rigid, so therefore you're not adapting. You're not able to pivot. Which then takes you longer. And I totally agree with that, because when I started Deli Fresh Threads, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and when I started it, I was very rigid in the beginning. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that, which then stunted my growth as a business, because I wasn't open to certain things that I should have been open to. And sometimes it takes you getting your own way sometimes when it comes that way. There's certain elements, obviously, that you kind of still want to keep, kind of like the foundation of what you're creating, which in your case is like either way, even though I may provide something that is like your everyday coffee, medium roast everyday coffee, but it's still going to have the same qualities. I'm still going to have the same principles and foundations for it. But but I'm also going to have a wider scope now of flavors and opportunities and different options for you to be able to choose from.
Absolutely. And I think even to, show the vulnerable side, like at times I before I posted something or released something, in my mind, I was like, well, what will my competitors think? And I remember talking to, I think it was Jeff actually, and he was like, Glen, your competitors don't buy your coffee. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
That's big. So again, I think anyone who's out there and thinking about doing their own thing, or they already are doing their own thing, and you said it perfectly, stunts your own growth. I would say I did that for at least 2-3 years of my time. And I'm still learning how to get outside of that box.
Yeah, but I will say that I appreciate, that's one of the things I appreciate from you, because this is our first time actually meeting. We've talked on social for forever. And that's one of the things that I've appreciated from you, is the fact that you've become very vulnerable and bringing up some of those things on your own social, which is a very hard thing to do sometimes when you're trying to bring those things up, and that's one of the things that I appreciated, because I love coffee, but I don't love coffee in the same, because like you mentioned, like the different flavors and all these different things. I'm like, I don't know those things, or nor do I appreciate it, because for someone who is maybe a purist, like in your case, you drink your coffee black. I'm a little bit more going like, I want to taste the coffee. I want to have a little bit of cream, but at the end of the day, I want to taste the coffee. But you're also, because I'm now also wanting to taste better coffee.
Sure.
And which I think those all kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think they do.
When it comes to that.
Yeah. And I would say like my greatest fulfillment is when I can get somebody to like move from a Starbucks or Dunkin' dark roast to like our Night Owl. And there's nothing better than that to me. Like that's one step. And then the other step, again, I like drinking your coffee with cream and sugar. Everyone's always like, oh, like I know you're going to be so insulted, but I'm not. You're drinking coffee.
Yeah.
That makes me happy.
Yeah.
So drink your coffee the way you want, in the way you want to drink it.
No, I totally agree with that. That's how I feel about people eating sandwiches. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, they're like, oh, I'm like, no, dude, I don't care. Eat it. I'm like, as long as you enjoy it, I don't care what you do. Just enjoy it. No, I totally get it. Let me once again, dumb coffee question, but let me ask, so are these things infused? Like when I start hearing you or hearing people say this has like a chocolate and a caramel, or this has like a blueberry or more floral, is this because when you roast them, they're being infused, or or is it a washout process? Like how's that kind of work?
This is a great question, because everyone that sees, or some folks that see our bags and they see those tasting notes, they're like, is this flavored coffee? Did you add this? We do not add any flavors to our coffee. The notes that are on the bag, just like a wine, right? Like a wine will say like charred barrel, red grape, right? The same thing applies to coffee. The way it's processed and the way it's grown and the varietal of the coffee give those flavor notes to when we roast it. Like that's just what happens to the coffee. Some of these crazy notes that you hear about are from the fermentation process of the coffee. And it's wild. That still fascinates me today, that you can get blueberry and strawberry flavors from fermenting coffee like that. And even furthermore, these new and progressive ways are like the Edwin Norena coffee that we have, where they literally put hops in the tank with the coffee's fermenting. And that's how you get that little hint of it on the finish. So, not to be mistaken, though, there are flavored coffees, right? Like people, Dunkin' and other folks sell coffees that literally they roast it and they spray flavoring in them in the cooling tray. We don't do that. We're looking for pulling out beautiful flavors from beautiful coffees to share. Okay,
I like that. I like how you being able to kind of go that route, and I think trust me, I had a cup of coffee you made me, and I wish it was like never ending cup, because it's delicious.
Can make more.
It's super.
We got plenty other.
Super delicious. So, obviously, I look at it as you're a family run business, and one of the things that I appreciate, and I think, and I look at it this way. Well, as I bring up the family run business, can you give me a little bit of a background? Like, did you have someone entrepreneur in your life? Were you influenced by anyone to want to start this? What kind of led you to be like, hey, I kind of want to do my own thing, or I kind of want to have, because, it's a very hard world sometimes to kind of switch that mindset of like, hey, I don't want to work for the man. I want to be the man. But at the same time, what it means when it comes to that, because you're actually working more. So can you kind of give me a little bit about that, and like, if anyone's influenced you when it comes to that?
Absolutely. So I would say when I was in 10th grade, my parents were like, hey, we're moving to Florida. We were living in Pennsylvania. And that's a big shock, right? Like middle of high school, boom. And my dad went from being a chef working 6-7 days a week, 12-hour shifts, to a project manager for a building company.
Oh, wow.
And I was just kind of like, looking back on it, I didn't realize it in the moment, but looking back on that, I was like, that's a big risk. Like moving your family across the country when the kids are still in school. And we moved down here because my uncle was down here, who was entrepreneur 101. I mean, he started his own company, very successful. He also did real estate as well. And when I moved down here, I hung out with him for probably, I don't know, 60% of my waking hours for the first 2 years because I didn't have any friends, like I didn't know anybody. And Uncle Gary was a huge inspiration to where I guess you can call it the entrepreneurial spirit came from. Talking about like having his vision boards on the wall. We'd be down there. I used to work with him during college on his production company, and I'd walk into his hotel room and he would have like vision boards on his wall. So like he was definitely like the visionary kind of guy, and I definitely got the majority of that influence from him.
No, that's great. Now, you obviously if you follow Otus Coffee on social, one of their favorite things that you'll see, and especially on the highlights, is Carson's Coffee Corner. I have 2 questions on that.
Sure.
One is I absolutely love it because for a few reasons. One, like he's adorable, but my 2 questions are, one is, do you find it interesting because obviously his mindset's going to be totally different than how it's a normal thing, like coffee, like, oh, my dad does a small business, my dad runs coffee. It's kind of like how I look at my daughter sees me, and obviously we become the example. So like my family I didn't have anybody who was entrepreneurial in my life. So for me, like I was the only one. I just knew that my parents said, hey, they said it, but they didn't actually act on it. So they just did it, to be able to be a good supporter, this and that. For me, my big thing is like, I feel like I try to be an example to show my daughter, hey, you can do these things. Do you think that I know for Carson, it's very normal for him. First off, how old is Carson?
He is 4 years old.
So if you don't know what he does, and it's like the cutest thing ever. My first question will be on the aspect of, because he does Carson's Coffee Corner, and he always wants to make coffee, and which is amazing. Have you gotten any slack from anyone, even though he drinks decaf? And I will note that because you say it every single time.
Sure.
How much crap have you gotten from parents saying, how can you give your kid coffee?
I don't think many. I think some people are like, wait a minute, is that decaf? And I'm like, yes, it is decaf. And I remember somebody once was like, but decaf has a certain percentage of caffeine in it. And I'm like, okay, like we're all having fun here. Let's relax. But
do you think, how does it make you feel, or to realize that you're like, and I ask because I'm like, obviously like he is seeing you're inspired, you're becoming his Uncle Gary, and you know what I mean, like you're Uncle Gary in the sense that
about that way.
He's kind of looking at it as he's seeing like, hey, and it'll be one of 2 things, kind of like what you and I kind of talked about, like in the aspect of when you even looked at your own, like you look at your parents, or you look at like your role models or people in your life, and you kind of say, I like this, I don't like this. Like I don't want to follow this route, I do want to follow this route. My route for me was, my parents always said that to do these things, but they didn't actually ever do it. I realized it, and I said, well, I want to do something that I love to do, even though I still have a full-time job. I still run my business and still do the podcast. These are all things that we want to do. That's the reason why I'm always kind of curious on like who inspires you, but at the same time, like I love being able to see people who have kids, especially in his age, because he's so young. I talk to other people that have kids, and they're like, yeah, they don't want anything to do with this. Like they don't want anything in this world, because they see it and they see the hustle and they see all the work, and they're like, I don't really want to do that. So it's either you do or you don't. But it's always kind of interesting to be able to see something like that.
Yeah, I think I had that realization like a couple weeks ago. I was talking to my wife, and I was just like, Carson actually asked to come to the warehouse, like instead of going to school. And I was just like, that's pretty cool, right? Like he wants to come hang out with dad and make some coffee. But I think, people are always like, oh, Carson's going to be the next, he's going to be competing for latte art in the next 10 years. And I'm like, you know what? If he does, awesome. Yeah. And if he doesn't want to, that's great too. Like, I would never be like, you have to follow dad's footsteps and take over. But I do think it's a great learning, you know, seeing somebody in action doing it like I did with my uncle, because it really gives you awareness of, oh, hey, I can do what I love to do as well.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Like, and people joke because they'll be like, "Oh, let me guess, your daughter's favorite thing to eat is sandwiches." I'm like, no.
Yeah, I get that question about Carson all the time.
Not at all. My my soon to 15. She's like, she'll eat pasta and loves desserts, but
sure.
Yeah, that's not her thing, and it's perfectly fine. Not all of us can be, you know, obsessed with the sandwich.
Yep.
What do you do, out of curiosity? What do you do for fun? Because obviously you're putting in a lot of work here. Obviously, besides spending time with family, what do you have any outside activities, or how do you get out of your head sometimes?
I like to golf. That's been a new hobby for me. I mean, I've golfed forever, but I've actually sat down and been like, okay, how can I not, you know, lose 30 balls around? So I've been learning how to golf recently, which has been really fun. We love to travel when we can. We just finally got a trip. We took a trip to Chicago, which used to be like our annual trip because that's where my wife is from. So we love just going somewhere new and just being dropped in the middle of nowhere and figuring things out. But outside of that, you know, I love sports as well. And I love music.
Nice.
I think if I wasn't doing coffee, I would be in music somehow.
Okay.
I'm not sure how, but that's what I like to think.
No, I like that. You work with a lot with different small businesses. What's some of the things that you've kind of... Let's talk a little bit about that partnership and the importance of it. And then also kind of like when you are a small business wanting to reach out, especially because you're kind of you're really doing, you have a two different model. You have the business to consumer, obviously where people can buy your coffee online, but then you also have the business to business, which obviously is a great one because that allows you to do your wholesale side of it. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen have been some of your, like, I guess, areas of success that you've been able to kind of, that you might be able to share with someone about, like, how, like, these are some things that have been helpful for you or that you've learned along the way?
Absolutely. I think for me, a big thing, a big reason that we've won over the years is because I've seen myself as the underdog in coffee. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the barriers to entry were pretty tough. And so the way that I won was like sneaky good coffee. Like our packaging wasn't great in the early years, and I thought our coffee was really good. And so I would just kind of come in as the underdog. And my true fulfillment in this business is the relationships I have with other business owners. It's so fun to see them take us on, buy our beans, and to see them win. And that, I think, is where I thrived. And I think people could feel that when I come in and drop beans off to them and want to help them dial it in and want to help them, you know, just win. And so the partnerships we have with our wholesale partners, I value immensely. And I think that's where, again, we just love what we do.
Yeah. No, and I think it's one of those as well. Like, if you can, it's kind of a mixture of they're using your product, so therefore people are now recognition of being able to be like, oh, this is good coffee. I never had this before. So then they want to do it that way. But at the same time, you also want to basically do, it's not just one of those things where, and that's one of the beauties of being a small business, especially when you're having that connection, because you're able to then provide them, you know, say, hey, this is my product, but you also want to make sure that they're good stewards of your product.
Sure.
So you want to make sure that they're brewing it correct, that it's being, you know, brewed correctly and stuff like that, and being prepared properly, so that way they're able to get that experience of what it is, because no one wants to serve bad coffee.
No, and I think that's a huge battle for us right now. We're kind of in that point where early on it was like, they're going to use our coffee. What am I going to do? Tell them not to do this, and that? Because I was just trying to win accounts, right?
Yeah.
Like, just try to build the business. But we're getting to a point where that's a serious matter. You know, you have to make sure that you're working closely with your partners, because the other day, I won't name the shop, but we had a shop barista who was like, hey, we had a customer come in here who went to a different shop that had your coffee. And when the customer asked, what coffee are you guys using? And she said, oh, we're using Otus. And she was like, you know what? I'm not going to have a latte. I'll have a matcha, because I had a very bad experience with that coffee at X shop. And that happens, you know? I mean, what are you going to do? It's not something that I'm not going to beat myself up about, but I think that's where just having a great relationship with your partners is so important. And I really think that high touch hand holding process is where we win right now, which again, we win at that right now, but that's hard to scale.
Well, no, and that I was going to say that, like, that's kind of the hard part, because it's like, it's all the benefits of having that personal touch as a small business. But then once again, it's that whole aspect of that we kind of talked about, like having an understanding of kind of loosening the reins a little bit and saying, hey, we kind of have to let go of some of this in order to be able to grow, because we want this to not just be a local thing. We want this to be a national thing.
Sure.
And that's always kind of like the hard part, but I think that's kind of part of the growing pains, right? Of as you continue to grow and continue to do, and get more accounts and more people trying your coffee, that's kind of how it just kind of develops.
Yeah. And I think the way I look at my business is we're really, 70% of our business is wholesale. And if you look at someone like a Jeff, who's 100% direct to consumer, they're such different businesses and they all have their challenges. But I think for us right now, we're in that realm of like, let's keep expanding the wholesale side. We love our customers on the B2C side. But our challenge right now is, well, how do we get to the next level? And I think we talked about that when you first got here. What's the next level? Is it hiring staff here at the warehouse? Is it hiring sales? Is it that's really where our challenges come from. But that's what it's all about in running a business, is what's the next challenge to figure out.
What is because obviously this is your full-time thing, and it's been full-time for the last few years. How does and I know obviously no day is the same, but like, do you have a certain time frame of like, okay, this like schedule where you kind of follow, you're like, these are my roasting days, these are my sale day, these are my delivery days,
yes,
and things like that. Like, is that kind of, and you like, based on how, I guess, the influx of what's needed, you kind of obviously are able to kind of fluctuate?
Yeah. So that's kind of been, Jacqueline and I have really tried to sit down and say, okay, how can we really make this more of a process and not a garage small business? And for us right now, like, we just upgraded our roaster. We had a 3 kilogram roaster, which did about, 6 pounds of roast. This one can do 35. So I was roasting for 4 days a week before we got this new roaster. So really I had no choice. Like we were basically just operating the business. We weren't really growing it. Now we roast Mondays, Tuesdays mostly, pack up everything on Wednesdays, we deliver on Thursdays, and then Fridays are emails, podcasts with you, any other sales, like whatever else we got to get done. That's kind of our schedule right now.
Okay.
And then weekends as needed.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great. There's like flexibility. There's like a little bit of everything, but the fact that you were able to kind of figure out and mainstream that, I think that's like huge. And also the fact that now you're working more, it's a little bit more effortless, because obviously you have a larger roaster, so therefore able to produce a lot quicker. Therefore, right. At the same time, hopefully you're getting to a point where you'll be roasting 3 days a week because you get more clients, and then trying to figure out and kind of fluctuating. From there.
That's the goal. We're really in growth mode right now.
Yeah.
Growth mode, but also doubling down on the efficiencies of the business, like focusing on that very much so right now.
Is there kind of, and I think I know the answer, and the only reason I'm asking is because in my world, in my t-shirt world, or clothing world, I noticed that there's kind of almost like a flux where it comes in waves of when people have a purchasing. Do you notice anything like that, or is it a constant, especially with your, obviously wholesale, that's kind of a consistent thing, but have you noticed through the years some form of fluctuation of what it is, or is it, obviously this is something that people consume constantly, so there's a lot of rebuys. So, but is that is that something you noticed, or do you notice kind of like a fluctuate where like, holy cow, like this is like, it somehow peaks up and then it drops down and goes up again?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different businesses, like you mentioned, the wholesale versus the direct to consumer. I would say wholesale very much is like, fall hits, huge spike in coffee sales, and then it kind of lulls before the holidays. And then the holidays, they're good. They're not like, I would say spring and fall are actually better, like for a longer period of time for wholesale. Summertime is definitely a lull here in Orlando. It's just hot. People are traveling. People are on the coast. So we see a little bit of a lull in the summertime. And then direct to consumer is just a whole different animal. I mean, you have people that buy every week. You have someone that orders once a year. You have a big spike in the holidays. So it's it's kind of all over the place when it comes. And I think if you asked anybody that works retail, they would say the same thing. Like, people try to put months and weeks in a bucket and say, oh, this week's going to be a good week because of last year. And it's just not the way it works. It's not.
No, I totally agree. I was just kind of curious if you also had the same thing as me, because sometimes I'm just kind of like, what is going on?
Yeah. Like it's dead. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, this is great.
Yeah. This is how it always should be.
And I think that's a big part of running a business. You know this. You have to stay neutral. You have to stay. If you're following your sales emotionally, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in a mental hospital very quickly.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. What and I'll use that as a great tip for success, or like, trying to keep yourself even keel. What about what's your advice for someone wanting to start something?
Wow. There's a lot of things, but I would say number one, and this, I don't know if this might surprise people, like, aside from what you're doing, how you're doing it, social media. You cannot post in enough places on social media. I still, to this day, and there's a lot of hate towards social media, and like, people think it's bad, and I think social media is the number one most important. You have to have a good product, obviously, as well, but it's such an important role in growing, especially in the early days of growing a business. And I learned a lot from Jeff at Jeff's Bagel Run on social media. I really think social media is a big reason why we are where we are today. And you cannot post in enough places, because some people are very stuck on one app, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. And if you're not on that platform, they're not going to see you. So again, moral to the story is social media has got to be a part, at least right now. This could change a year from now, but
what do you have anything that you kind of take that you I don't know, any tips or anything like that? Is it a certain mindset that you put on, like, hey, I'm constantly either videoing or constantly doing something? What are you kind of doing for that to kind of help? Because the idea a lot of times is we get stuck that it's not perfect, but in reality, like, that's what people want to see. They want to see the stories. They want to see the things that, obviously some production value, but like, they really want to just see what's going on and what's happening behind the scenes and things like that.
Yeah, I think there was actually a study done recently, I read, that people respond better to videos that aren't perfect. And so the big thing for us is, like, we want to be transparent. We want to be approachable in coffee. And my thought in my head is always document the journey. There's like, everyone always tells me when they're starting a business, like, what do I do? What do I show? Document the process. If you're driving to pick up your labels, talk about something on the ride there. Show them where you're getting your labels. We do it all the time when new coffee arrives. That's when I get excited. What am I going to do? Document that and share it. People respond so well to just real, everyday situations and problems and solutions. They're not looking for that perfect video. When I first started, I really thought we had to have, because I used to work in production back in my college days, I used to think we had to have lighting, we had to have a good microphone. And once I threw all that out the window, it started to work. So don't focus on perfection. Focus on documenting and getting out things that people want to watch.
Okay. Any other advice if they're wanting to start something?
Just don't listen to other people in the kindest way possible. Like, no one's ever going to see your vision. Like, when I bought my $5,000 roaster, I had friends and family saying, "What are you doing?" And they couldn't see the vision. And sharing the vision with somebody is cool, but like, they're never going to get it in the way that you see it. So just focus on what you're doing and don't listen to someone that might say it's not going to work.
Yeah. No, I totally, I agree with that 100%. It's funny because I've talked to Brent from Deli Llama. I've also talked to Matt Hinckley. That's like the number one thing. They just said, like, half the time I'm not even looking at what anyone else is doing or whatever. I just put my head down. I get to work. I just stay on the mission of what you're trying to do. And sometimes it's really hard because, we get kind of stuck. We get stuck, especially when it comes to social. Like, there's the good and the bad with it. We get kind of stuck looking at what other people are doing, or the scrolling, where you just sit and scroll and you're mindlessly scrolling and you just you're taking all this stuff on, which is obviously like fake reality for a lot of people, of what they're posting or what they're trying to show. And in reality, it's kind of like they're dealing with the same things, but they're just not showing it. And so I totally agree 100% with what you're saying with that. And the message that you had about the whole idea of social, like I should do better, because it's one of those where like, it's very easy. And I say this all the time, to the point where like a lot of times when you're like so close to it, you don't realize it, or you don't think that anyone wants to see it because you've already posted it once. But like a lot of times only a small fraction of people actually see what you're posting. So you're kind of constantly, it's okay to repost old things or reshare or re-record a new version of it, of something that you've done in the past, and maybe do it in a different way, a different flavor of it, so people can actually see that and be able to experience it.
Absolutely. I love what Gary Vee says. He says, number one, you're never as saturated as you think you are. Mm-hmm. And number two is you have to not only stay neutral on your sales, but you have to stay neutral on outside feedback. So if you get a review that says best coffee in the world, back in the day, I'd be like, oh my God, like I was on cloud nine.
Yeah.
But then somebody would say, I had it here and it sucked. So you have to just understand that all the outside feedback is just that. It's just feedback, and you got to stay neutral.
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, there is a certain level of being able to have, especially if feedback is consistent, in the sense that if there are certain things that you're hearing that need to be improved on, or you need to kind of look at, like sometimes,
absolutely,
and that's kind of, and once again, that's kind of the whole idea of like, how rigid are you? How adaptable are you? And how flexible do you want to be? Because obviously there's some things where you may have a certain thought process of how you want certain things to be, and everyone's telling you, no, you should be doing it this way, or you should do this. And you're like, well, that's not the vision I have right now. So sometimes there's like a hard decision there when like, what is it that your vision is and your mission is, and what are you trying to do? And that's sometimes, I think, the hardest part, especially as you continue to grow, sometimes to figure out like, where am I, like, what are my main core values that I'm trying to have? And then what are the mission and the vision that I'm trying to do as a business?
Sure.
And that's kind of that's always a super tough one.
And going back to that first point on, like, you can't control everybody. And I remember like when I first started, one bad review and I was like trying to like respond to them to get them to like change their mind. And you can't do that. You have to just be focused on what you're doing. And again, take the feedback as it is, but don't let it tear you down or build you up. Stay neutral. Yeah.
I actually saw a round table with like De Niro, Tom Hanks. And that was the one thing they said was like, stay even keel on the highs and the lows, because it's a long journey and you're going to have highs and lows and it all evens out. But you, at the same time, when you're in that process, it's, if you're not looking at it on the long journey, then sometimes it can affect you because you don't realize that at the end of the day, it all evens out. The good and the bad will all just kind of even out, and then there'll be another day, and then you just kind of go from there. So it's kind of, it's like it goes right in line with that information. Glen, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you inviting me to the Nest, being able to have some Otus coffee, and being able to just kind of hear your story and talk with you. I think it's been a long time coming. I know I've been hounding you because you're the first coffee person that I've had on, and I did it intentionally because I wanted to make sure it was you that I spoke to, just because of from what I saw, and also just meeting you through Jeff's Bagel Run and everything like that. I just thought it'd be a great way to be able to have people to get to know you a little bit and be able to go. Where can people find you? Where can people, if they're, obviously you can buy from you directly, but where can people actually drink your coffee at other locations? Let's do a little plug there.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we have our website. You can pick up at the Nest, which is our warehouse, which is where we are here recording. And then we support probably 25 different shops monthly throughout Orlando. That includes Jeff's Bagel Run, Create Coffee, Binks Orlando, Don Juan, Framework, Vesper at times, Canvas in Lake Nona, and then we have some other buddies out on the coast. Copperline Coffee, if you're in Daytona or Port Orange, highly recommend them. And hopefully some more spots soon. And I missed a few in there, but we have a lot of great partners here in Orlando.
We'll put them in the show notes. I'll have you give me a list. We'll put it on the show notes.
Beautiful.
Where can people follow you on social and online?
Otus Coffee, Otus Coffee. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, kind of, YouTube. Those four are the main.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you. That's our show for today. Thank you so much to Glen of Otus Coffee for being on and having lunch with me, or for me having coffee with him. Definitely make sure to check them out online. You'll see in the show notes all the different places you can go drink it. Or if not, just buy yourself some and make yourself some good coffee. Trust me, it is super good. I'll be bringing some home, some with me. If you enjoyed the show, definitely make sure to subscribe. Make sure you support all the different small brands and small businesses that we've spoken to on the show. If you want to support me, you can definitely support my brand, Deli Fresh Threads. Go online, do some shopping. Obviously, I'm totally down for if you want to do a coffee selfie or a sandwich selfie. I'm down for any of the selfies. Just give me that as long as it's good. Thank you. Until next time, keep eating sandwiches and follow your passion.